even in there, I would get so detailed as to like, I had one of those days today. I even stepped in a puddle on the way to the car. Like that's in my training log next to what my heart rate was on a 3x6K workout, like so that's the value of the think piece, because when you write things down, when you have hobbies and ways to decompress from something that's really hard, it helps you bounce back. Writing things down is literally a record of all of the things that you've learned along the way. Because believe me, there are times when you feel like your life is over, even on the national team. You're like, I know nothing about this sport. I'm terrible at it. How could I possibly? And then you look at your training log and you go, oh, look where I was 10 days ago. Look what the last 10 days have been. The last 10 days have been fantastic. And I had a bad day today.
But we'll get started here in a couple seconds here, but any questions, any last things for me?
Nope. How you doing?
Cool. I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited. Well,
good.
I'm excited for this. I'm excited for, or I guess we'll just start, right? Let's just jump in here. Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. And for everyone listening, so we have Lindsay Shoop here, who is, Lindsay, this is funny. I think you were probably, when I first started this podcast a year plus ago now,
okay,
you were one of the first people I reached out to. And timing and scheduling and things like that, here we are a year later, we finally found a time to sit down and make it work. Because, and the reason I wanted to reach out to you right from the jump is I got to know you up in Dartmouth doing the camps. And one of my favorite things about that entire, multiple weeks that we got to spend up in New Hampshire, up in Hanover, was sitting down and talking with you mostly, over the breaks and the lunches and this and that.
Yeah.
And learning so much about just, yes, there's your amazing career as an Olympic gold medalist, as a walk-on, as an accomplished coach, athlete, Olympian, but then the wealth of information that you have just in rowing in general, in performance, and all the different things surrounding rowing, that it was without question someone I wanted to get on right away. And here we are. And this is even better because now, we have an opportunity to just dive into all the things that you have going on. But before we kind of kick things off, because again, this is going to be we only have an hour and, hour plus, and I'm already thinking about, hey, like we got to book you for a round 2, because I think it's going to get pretty dense. But with that, Lindsay, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started in rowing. Obviously, just a little bit about your start, your unconventional start to rowing, and then how that kind of turned into now a career, however many years later, with some pretty big milestones in between. But kick things off a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
So back in no, I'm kidding. I won't go all the way back. It's actually why I wrote a book about the whole thing, because it tells the whole story from start to finish from when I was like 2 years old. But I grew up playing a ton of different sports. I grew up with a bunch of boys, so I kind of had this rough and tumble, try and keep up with my older brother and all of our friends, growing up in the country. So had an athletic background ever since I was a kid, as far as like, not an athletic background that I would have said, oh, I'm, but that it was just, we were always doing things, right? And we were always doing different things. So I had a broad spectrum of what people now call movement literacy, right? Come to find out, climbing trees and falling down and trying new things is really helpful for all of our, athletic capacities. But for me, I was just like, oh, I'm just being a kid, growing up in the country, doing the thing, chasing my brother, trying to keep up with my brother. And because I was tall, I wore a size 5 shoe in the 2nd grade and things like that. Like I was always kind of leveled up or treated like I was older than I was when it came to the sports that I did play. So I was often put with people that were older than me or a little bit bigger and stronger than me, which kind of always put me in that position of always trying to keep up with people that were a little bit more advanced than you. So when I actually graduated from high school, like spend my whole youth sports career doing things like that, when I graduated from high school, I actually didn't think I was good enough to play sports in college. I had played basketball for 10 plus years. Volleyball was my favorite sport. I played that throughout high school too. I played soccer, field hockey, baseball, like I said, basketball, volleyball, tennis. I rode horses for a long time. I swam in the summertime, did all of these different things on top of just the random stuff that kids find to do when they grow up in the country, But none of that led me to believe that I was going to be good enough to play in college, let alone a Division I college. So I applied to go to the University of Virginia for academic reasons. It was the best school. I'm from Virginia, the best school for the money. So it was like, all right, start there. And if they don't take me, then I'll go somewhere else. And, I applied early decision to kind of seal that deal and give myself the best foot forward as far as getting in there was concerned. And I did luckily get in. And I spent 2.5 years at the University of Virginia as a non-athlete, doing all the things. Like I went to Mexico for spring break with my best friend, like I did things like that. So I had those collegiate experiences. I had the random job at the bagel shop. I worked at the gym. I stayed up all night doing absolutely nothing that I probably should have been doing, all of the kind of trial and error things to find your feet in the world without sports. And lo and behold, writing my book helped me kind of unpack this a lot as I reflected on my whole upbringing and what the heck it was that ultimately resulted in my teammates and I doing something that no American women had done before at the 2,000-meter race distance, at the Olympic level, and really looking back into that, it was like, I was exploring what the heck I do without sports and without teams and without teammates and without that structure. And luckily, I bumped into the head rowing coach at the University of Virginia just very serendipitously. It's a funny, uncanny story. Again, why I wrote the book about it, because it's way too much to talk about in an hour here. But he literally basically stopped me and was like, hey, Lindsay, I had met him in the past, so he knew who I was. And he said, the first thing he said was not like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I saw your parents the other day. It was, it's never too late to row. Just like deadpan. And at the time, I had actually told him no a few times in the past, or had kind of avoided the conversation a few times in the past. And I said, I'd really like that, because after going through all of these things that I was doing that really weren't me, my grades were starting to decline. My weight was going up. I was kind of socially, not where I needed to be. So I was turning into this person that wasn't the person that I wanted to be. And he offered me an opportunity to change trajectory. And ultimately, I met up with him one day. He literally took the time as the head coach of a Division I program to meet with me in the wintertime, because it was December at this point of my junior year in college when I bumped into him. And he put me on the erg. He put me on the tank first, put me on the erg, and then said, come to the first day of practice. He said, you don't have experience. You can't come to Florida. I would invite you otherwise, but because they were going to go on a winter training trip. And so I went to the first day of practice that following January, which was spring semester of my junior year in college at UVA. And then the directive that I got that day was, welcome to the team. There was, more to it. I literally almost ran away on my first day. I was so intimidated by the prospect of trying to walk onto a team like that, because UVA has and always has been a top tier team for 20 plus years, and the directive that I got was, if you have any questions, ask your teammates. So there I was, all of a sudden, right back into, even though it was a very unfamiliar territory as far as the sport was concerned, it was, here are all these people that are more advanced than you are, and now your job is to keep up. And so, in reflection of how I spent my entire first 17 years of my life, was, oh, I'm just back in this situation of, well, I am slow. I hate running. I can't even pick up the 45-pound bar in the weight room. What the heck is a clean? I have no idea what these things are. And everyone else does. That's how I felt. But all I did was I'd look up the hill when they're running so much faster than me. And I would just think to myself, keep up for as long as you can. And then maybe one day I'll be that fast. And little by little, you kind of chip away at that. And I went from basically being, my first 2K was, and I know that for anyone that's in high school thinking this, I was 6 feet tall and about 190 pounds when I walked onto the team. So for me to go 7:58 at 20 years old, to go 7:58 for my first 2K was not as big of a benchmark as what it would have been had I been, 5'6" and 130 pounds in high school at 13 years old. Had I been that person and done that right away, that would have been kind of like a woo, yeah. But within a year, after all the training, I lost about 30 pounds. I could finally run. I enjoyed running. I enjoyed being a part of the team. And I dropped a minute on my 2K in that first year. Now, it took me the rest of my athletic career to get 10 seconds after that, but I was able to get pretty quick, pretty fast just by going all in and really just focusing on the day to day. And it was like, all right, if I have questions, ask my teammates and try and keep up and use them kind of as your standard.
Wow. And before you go, like, what was your
Figured I'd
you
pause
you
there.
no, that's great. That's great. And you said you had, like, you played every sport under the
Yeah.
sun, kind of growing up,
Yeah.
and then you had this 2.5 year window in college, right? But
Yeah.
what sport, because this is something I love talking about, right? Like, I love talking about athletes who walked on in college,
Hmm.
obviously
Hmm.
found success, right? And
Yeah.
the rest is history. What sport did you latch on to the most in high school? If there was one or two that you felt okay, and then as you reflect backwards now, right?
Hmm.
As you look backwards on your career, like, what do you think had the greatest impact on you to be able to pick it up so quickly and be able to drop a minute
Oh,
over the course of a year? Like, what do you think, like, really kind of latched on and gave you the skill set or the foundation or the intangibles to be able to see that rapid trajectory
yeah.
right off the start, right off the jump?
I mean, I think part of it was knowing that what all the things that I was doing was not the person that I wanted to be. And this sport became an outlet that rowing specifically, out of all the sports I ever played, taught me the most about myself while also being a part of the team. Like, you get to stretch yourself while also getting to work with other people while stretching yourself. Um, I've often just said kind of off the cuff that volleyball was my favorite sport. And that's probably because I was of an age where I was really developing a lot in that, you're in high school. I was in ninth through 12th grade at that point. So the psychology was really developing there. And I had some really good friends on the team. But there's something unique about volleyball where every time something happens, like there's a play stop every 30 seconds or less. And so you always come together as a team. And we always had like a clap or a cheer or a thing that we would say, whether it was a point or a point for the other team. And so it was really super team oriented, like really embedded, really obviously team oriented. And there were always those moments of like you celebrated the goods and you picked each other up immediately from the things that weren't so great. And you could, just by doing that, you could really maintain the trajectory of the game itself. Like you could really shape it. You could really what's the word? Not well. I guess you could control it, but guide it. You could stop something from going too far down the bad direction, and then turn around and right the ship pretty quickly if you really needed to. And so I think that one really allowed me to kind of experience something that was different than any of the other sports that I ever played. One thing I will say is that a friend of mine, I did a book club for her because she has a big book club where she was living at the time. And she said, you might not have specialized in a sport because I didn't. I played a lot of sports. And that is something I have very specific feelings about now as a coach, that people specialize so early. We've known for 50 plus years that early specialization is not the right thing unless you're in very specific types of sports, and rowing is not one of those sports. It's the beautiful thing about it is you can start rowing very, very early, but you're going to cross train a ton. So by its very nature, it is a non-specialized sport, right? If that makes sense, right? You're going to do a lot of different things to hone your skill set across a lot of things. Um, but her comment was, you might not have specialized, but if you specialized in anything, it was in teams. And so those team sports and developing that kind of cohesion and how to develop interpersonal relationships and how to work with people that are your friends or that you might not be friends with, but still pursue the same end results, the same kind of reasons why you're in the sport. And you can really respect the effort that each of you is putting in there, even if you aren't best friends, at least not best friends every day, which I think is a big piece of that. Because I know if you fast forward all the way down to the day that I'm sitting with the head National Olympic team coach at the time, and he's telling me why I made the team, it wasn't, oh, you're this tall and this is your erg score and you've won all these races. It was, you've been consistent and you have a strong sense of team. And so then you take all of those youth experiences of being on teams and chuck them all the way down to the national team. And it was those things that he reflected on as being the real reasons why I was an integral piece to that particular boat that year, and certainly being at the University of Virginia. I know you mentioned that you sat down with Coach Kevin Sauer. Like, he always, always, always championed the team, that it was all about the team, that it was about winning the team championship over just an individual boat championship, and that is a very hard thing to do but he got us to buy right in. And I feel very fortunate in the people that I was surrounded by at the time, because those people bought right in, and we could work hard and be silly and goofy and like pick on each other kind of in a, silly, goofy kind of way. And that really helped us kind of manage just how hard it was. Like, it helped us be even better racers, because we'd step back and be like, oh my God, that was so hard. And yet we survived. So, yeah.
And there's so much in there, like, too. And we're going to circle back around to, like, the specialization, but even, because I'm a huge, right, like, I was a walk-on in college, or like I walked on when I got to college, played, wrestling, football, lacrosse, all these different things growing up, then found rowing later. So, like, I'm a massive, advocate for athletic versatility, athletic diversity, and the skill sets that eventually help you as a rower.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a massive component. And before we get to that, because again, like that's some of the stuff that I love having you on for, because I think
do you mind if I just to add to what you're saying, and this is something that as years go by, people start to forget these things, but the college infrastructure has changed. So there isn't as much of a place for walk-ons anymore, which is really unfortunate, because before that infrastructure changed, when I raced at the Olympics, 5 of us learned how to row in college, 2 of us after our freshman years. I was a junior. Susan Francia was a sophomore. She learned as a sophomore. And then then we went on, and, she went on to win 2 Olympic gold medals. I won 1. Erin Cafaro was a walk-on, 2 Olympic gold medals. Anna Goodale was a walk-on, 1 Olympic gold medal. Like, Anna Michelson was a walk-on, so it's Olympic silver and Olympic gold medal. And when you look back at the men's 8 from Athens in 2004, 5 of those guys learned how to row in college, right? They were walk-ons as well. So then multiple of those guys who were walk-ons went on to win more than 1 Olympic gold medal and stayed a part of the national team in a lot of different boat classes, not just 8s, throughout their careers. So I am not the only walk-on to have gone on and had success. And I actually, Yas Farouk, who's the head coach at the University of Washington, she went to Wisconsin. She made a really interesting comment that she said during an interview leading up to last year's NCAA championships, that walk-ons have played an integral role in every national championship that the University of Washington has ever won, But here we lose that infrastructure. And so we start to lose a place for this really, I don't want to say valuable commodity, but this opportunity on both ends of the spectrum to change people's lives through the sport, because that's absolutely what it does, but also to then show success as far as whatever you consider success at the national team and Olympic and even the collegiate realm, for people like that. And that really can then, by virtue of helping them understand that, sure, you started something late, but when you really invest in the little day-to-day and you focus on this thing, you can produce these outcomes, and you can become a better human as a result of that, which then bleeds into other areas of your life beyond sport, and you can kind of go on and pay it forward from there for others.
And I love that. And I had Brian Volpenheim on, last month. He was on, and talked about his walk-on experience, and obviously, the trajectory that he took after that, right? Being a walk-on, in college at Ohio State. So again, like
more than 1 Olympic gold medal.
Right. Yeah. Like there's,
or more than 1 Olympic medal, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's just, I think one of the big things is there's athletes who don't have the exposure to rowing at a young age. Like my high school didn't have it when I was growing up, right? I walked on and I forget who dragged me down to the boathouse for the first time, and then there we have it, right? Like, but there's a lot of athletes who aren't exposed to that until they get to college. Their high schools don't have it, and they are an athlete who has volleyball experience, or they're the basketball player, or they're the swimmer. You see that a lot. And they have this skill set and these things. And I think the big thing that I love is they have the energy when they arrive at college, where it's like, oh, this is new. And I've been rowing for 2 weeks, and now I'm beating this person over here who rowed all through high school. And then that starts to really just latch on to their motivation and their energy. Like, I think it's a huge piece. And for you, kind of with that, like, when did you figure out as a walk-on in college, right, to kind of, because again, we'll kind of pivot to a little bit of other things as well, but to kind of, talk a little bit more about your personal story. Like, when did you realize in your time at Virginia,
Mhm.
oh, like I'm a year into this or
Yeah.
whatever, and I'm actually pretty good at it, and I could potentially see a path to a Olympic career. When did
Yeah.
that resonate, or when did that kind of come into your mind? And tell me a little bit about that experience.
Um, when I started to see myself get faster on the erg, right, and I started to get fitter, and the boat started going faster. I got put from the novice eight, second novice eight to the first novice eight, and I didn't know any reasons why, but I started to kind of, and now even more reflecting, looking back on things that I would do very organically, that I was really sensory oriented. Like I liked the way the water sounded. I liked the way the sun glinted when I would look down at the water, and how could I move with that, and kind of the hydrodynamics of it. I've always enjoyed the water, always been kind of an ocean minded person, enjoyed swimming, so there were those natural elements that I was drawn to, that I think that kind of allowed me to, I don't want to say self teach, but I just tried to follow what my teammates were doing, and then learned from that as well. And so as I kind of chipped away at my erg score, and then you compound the fact that the boat started to go faster, I got really interested in like, oh, maybe I could make a varsity boat. That'd be super cool. I, had already planned to go study abroad in Spain before I even knew that I was going to be trying to join the rowing team. So that summer kind of, instead of being put in a position to maybe make one of the boats, for the varsity team at that point, was, oh, I'm just going to go to Spain and not work out at all. you know? But then when I came back in the fall, I had a teammate who was then my roommate, one of my better friends that I became friends with when I joined the team, who was also a sophomore. She was a sophomore and I was a junior at the time, and moving into my senior year and her junior year. And she was like, she came back from the summer, was like, we must erg, we have to do this 20-minute erg test. And because she was doing it, I was like, all right, let's do this. We didn't know any better. So we literally sat down and each just did 20 minutes as hard as we could every day for like 2 weeks before the test. So that then, by the time the test came, it was like, all right, let's do it again. Why not? And so as my ERG score again continued to improve, we sat down with goals meetings that December. So this is December of my senior year. And my goals meeting with the head coach, Kevin, was right after my friend Margaret's. And so he got up to go to the bathroom, and I kind of saw on his notes what her goals were. I peeked. I'm not going to say it was right there, but I read it upside down. And I had gone in there saying, like, I had gone something like 7-11 by December on a 2K. And so earlier in the spring, I had gone, 7:58. And then by the winter, I was going 7-11. And so I literally went in there being like, I want to go 7:10 on my 2K. Like, why the heck would I say go 1 second faster, But I saw that she wanted to go 6:50. So I was like, holy crow. So when he got back, I said, I want to break 7 minutes on my 2K. And he kind of caught himself chuckling at me, because it was almost this like garish, like, how dare this person, And so he goes, okay, let me, I would have said, I might have even said 6:50, but, oh, and I told him I wanted to break 7 and I wanted to be in the varsity. And he said, or in the 2B, yeah, either way, because my friend had said she wanted to go 6:50 and be in the 1B. I kind of took like the next layer down from there, but that stretched me from where I had walked in, what I had walked in there to say. And he basically told me, like, if you had told me this a few months ago, I would have kind of said no way. But now that you're improving, maybe we'll put 1B, 2B there, and we'll put 7 minutes. We'll put that down. And then, a few months later, lo and behold, I had broken 7 minutes, and I made the varsity 8. It was one of those things where in that fall, I was 3C to the 2V, and the head national team coach at the time, Tom Terhar, had come to practice to look at another one of my teammates. And after a practice, he had actually pinpointed three others of us, Molly Baker, Beth Clark, and me, on top of my other teammate, Jen. And so then I think that also helped Kevin kind of go, okay, maybe she's not terrible. Like that it took Tom coming to practice to kind of say, hey, what about these other people? So ultimately, like that was less than a year of rowing at that point for me when Tom came. And so then that kind of put it in the back of Kevin's mind that I could maybe be halfway decent at this. And these are all kind of side conversations that came to me after the fact. But Kevin had had a conversation with my mom at one point, and he actually told her that he thought I could be pretty good at it. And so then through my mom, that comes back to me, and that kind of fueled a little bit more curiosity about it. And, later that spring, my teammates and I, 5 of us in our varsity 8 that year at UVA learned how to row at UVA. So 5 walk-ons in our varsity 8 went on to come top 5 in the country in our varsity 8. And I mean, our average erg score at the time was like 710, 720. It was not what it is by any stretch today. And yet we were able to come in top 5 in the country. And, people will have what they say about that. But I'm like, all of these experiences, I can't help but think, that there was something about the camaraderie. There was something about the way that we paid attention to each other and to the sensory experiences of it without being too muddied by the data and the devices distracting us. We were able to really learn how to row hard for each other and care about each other, and also row pretty well as a result of that, to exceed what our erg scores ever would otherwise kind of tell you, and I don't want to digress too far from that, but that was that initial thing. Was you combine when Tom came to visit, pointed me out, and then when the erg score started getting a little bit better, and my friend I saw what she was going for, and I thought, well, I need to take a bigger risk. Like I'm being too conservative here. It's too conservative here, But if you fast forward, the speed that we were able to produce when I got to the national team was really fast relative to our erg scores, which is something that we'll probably circle back to. So I'll put a pin in that for now.
No, and that's and I think that's like, again, like I think it's the, like, one of the things I hear a lot, like, or just like hearing from you, it's like, just, okay, listening to your teammates, being a part of the team, putting, again, having teammates who are all kind of all in, and then obviously having that fueled by coach who recognizes, that there is something here, and then can also help kind of fuel that as well.
Yeah.
And then kind of taking that, like, okay, well, now you are, you're a longtime coach, right? You've coached at every level. Like, what are some, like, when you arrived now training for the national team, right? And now, like, the stuff that or the things that you were doing as a national team athlete, right? And then obviously going on and competing for the Olympics and winning the Olympics, like, was that a big shock to you? Was that a big change to you going to the national team? And like, what were some of the key differences that you were like, oh, like, I'm only a few years into my rowing career. Now I'm training at the highest level.
Yeah.
Like, was that a shock to you? Like, what are some things that you learned in that process? Tell me a little bit about that, because I feel like that's helpful for younger athletes as well to know.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, like, they might all be kind of in their silo of high school rowing or college rowing, or maybe they're a master's athlete and they haven't had the exposure to learning things like that. Like, talk about that transition and the eye-opening aspects, if it was the exposure to it. Talk about that experience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I have said numerous times that I feel very fortunate in kind of my chronology, my timeline of where I just very serendipitously entered my rowing career, because I did enter at a point where it was like at the advent of a lot of technological changes, where I didn't row with wooden oars, but I rowed with, the oars that came before croakers, and that croakers came before the Concept 2s, and then no GPS versus GPS, the heart rate monitor with one button versus the heart rate monitor that has insane numbers of functionalities. But to enter into the national team, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about when I say, okay, imagine what that would be like, whether you're going from high school to the next level of college, whether you're going from college and you're looking toward the national team. And this idea of what it must be like, because it did snowball and change, and the system changed at the national team level, but it's kind of coming back around. And I really do hope, I have a lot of hope for the future of American rowing, that it can come back around and really build up appropriately the platform. Because my first day, and I love this, like that was my first day, and this is why I wrote about this very specifically, is that my first day with the national team, we spent like 2 hours cleaning the boathouse and 20 minutes rowing. Right? It was the most important thing that we could do. There were 7 of us. The coach, Tom, at the time, he had been an assistant coach through the previous Olympic cycle, took over as the head coach mid-cycle leading into the Athens Games in 2004. So that's 2001, 2. And we were his first full Olympic cycle as the head coach of the national team. And instead of having the typical 20 or 30 people there that had been the training center, this bulk of people, he literally sent everyone away and gave them basically 2 years to kind of figure out what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to come back or not. He gave them training. He told them they needed to lift. He told them that they needed to row a single and things like that. But that allowed there to be just 7 basically brand new people that had made non-Olympic boats. Only a couple, 1 or 2 people had done that. But most of us had never raced internationally. We did not travel as a team for under 23s at the time. We literally went and raced Canadian Henley. That's as far as we got. We raced Independence Day Regatta in Philly and Canadian Henley. That was it. Like that was our under 23 experience. So we had no real international racing under our belt. But what that allowed us to do was a start point like at the very just basics. And he took basically the national team version of a novice program and brought in the right personalities of people. And I don't know if it was on purpose or what, but he brought in some physiology. I feel like I was there for comedic, comic relief sometimes, but like there were literally 7 of us that showed up on day 1. Tom's already up the rafters, moving boats himself at Lake Mercer, and we learned how to carry singles properly. We learned what equipment was going to be ours, that was used equipment that people had loaned him to let us row, because we were going to row singles. We were told if you could go faster in the single and get faster on the rowing machine, you would get shots at making the team for the World Championships that year. But our very first day, we learned how to carry things. We learned that we needed to get a stroke coach and a heart rate monitor because that would help us go faster. And we also learned what epoxy we would need, that we'd have to go to Home Depot and buy, because he said, "Do you see a boatman? There is no boatman here. If you break it, you have to fix it yourself." So we learned those fundamental pieces of accountability to each other, to respect the space and the opportunity that we were about to embark upon together. And that's where it started, because none of the rest would even matter. We could have had the most professional, perfect training program, but if we didn't start where we were and then gradually progress it, and if we didn't start with accountability and respect, then it would not have become what it became. So it's this really beautiful thing when I look back on it. It was like, it allowed us to have a core identity as a group. Mary Whipple will talk about identity quite a bit, but it really goes back to, you take 7 people and impart the characteristics and bring in the personality traits, and that really hones that core of good, right? That can then just grow from there. And when you have that sort of strong, positive culture, people will either come or go. And you want the culture to be positive and you want it to be strong, and the right people will stay. And then it ultimately starts to turn into something that can do great things, right? Rather than, because the same situation could happen, but you could have a negative culture and it won't necessarily turn into such great things.
Wow. I think that's, and I love, again, I think it's just great to kind of paint that picture and for people to understand, like, and getting back to the little things and starting from literally knowing, like getting a true understanding of what goes into
Our
the
original
ability
boat repairs
to
were not very pretty, but we did them and the boats floated. There was only one boat though that, it also taught us just to take really good care of things, there was one boat that got bonked by it rains, they're giant logs and things like that. But most of the equipment we were able to keep very minimal damage, if at all, and when we started moving out of singles into pairs and doubles and things like that, it really we have more eyeballs. So we really managed to make it through without really damaging much. But what, the other thing that I'll say is there was a point in time where Tom was also really responsive initially, where if he noticed that people started to get little hiccups with injury or started to get a little sicker than they should, he literally sat us down one day and said, I've noticed that maybe we can't manage this much training yet, so we're going to dial it back. So he really responded to us, and he gradually added volume to what we were doing and added intensity to what we were doing. I've even gone back and tallied the amounts of things that we did. And one of my next projects is to literally systematically digitize all of my training logs. But it really fit the science of what is safe progression. And so when there was a little thing here and there, he would dial it back a bit, and that helped us stay healthy, which that original experience that goes back to my first year with the team. That has imprinted upon me probably the most of there's no grand secret really. The basic is meet people where they are and then progress gradually, slowly. One of the greatest characteristics you can have as in anything that you want to do, if you want to be very, very good at something, is just patience. What is a really important characteristic of a high level athlete? Patience. Being okay with doing the same thing over and over and over again and just making tiny little adjustments, because when you do that, you're physically and mentally more capable of managing them.
And that kind of is a perfect segue into, again, I think there's the incredible success that you had as an athlete, but then there's this wealth of information that you've learned as a coach, and then also now looking backwards and kind of taking the things you learned as an athlete, now bringing that in, in the work that you do with athletes at any level. And I think one of the big things, I think, again, like, because it's you in my conversations with you prior to this, like, so much good and
Working on that.
like, you have a very, like, again, like, you're very knowledgeable about,
Yeah.
I think, the things that maybe a lot of people often overlook. And I think spending some time talking about that, I think is going to be incredibly valuable for anyone who's listening, and coaches who can then take some of those things and apply to their own teams and athletes. And I think a great place to start for you is like, okay, with what do you feel like are some things as you look back on your career that ultimately, led to, or you feel like led to, some of these successes that you as a boat had? And this could be, I think, again, like, there's the things that you do as a boat, but then there's the things that people do as individuals. And I know that you're big on recovery, you're big on nutrition, you're big on, movements that can help build the athlete, to help, all these different things to, make them a more efficient and more effective rower long term. Like,
Yeah.
as you look back, like, are there things that you can kind of pinpoint that were a priority, whether it was in that phase or maybe you learned them later on, that helped guide you to your own personal success? And then we can kind of branch that off into maybe what other athletes can start to implement into their own rowing.
I would say, without getting too high level, like and you don't really have to go high level with this stuff, is that I didn't get hurt for the first 7.5 years that I rowed, like all the way through the Olympics. There were probably 2 or 3 of us that slept more than anybody else, and we had the least amount of injury issue. And so the 5 things that I say, and I like to make them rhyme. It's sleep, drink, eat, move, and think, right? And so that's just kind of like little ways to kind of think about these categories. Sleep is at the top because it is going to influence everything else so much. Like, you could eat the same thing every day and change how you're sleeping, and it will manifest differently in your body, right? The physical and the mental characteristics will change according to your sleep. And it's also something that's easier to track and pay attention to, in terms of, like, could I go to bed at 15 minutes sooner? Probably. Right. And that actually matters a lot. And I've been very intentional in terms of learning a lot more about these things. It's part of what drove me to grad school and doing a master's in exercise physiology, because I knew these basic things and was like, what really was it? And come to find out, it's sleep. So that's your sleep piece. Drink is hydration, making sure you're staying hydrated. Again, I put those 2 above nutrition as part of nutrition. And I talk about them in nutrition talks because they're, again, easier to track than all the different parts. There are a lot of different philosophies when it comes to nutrition. And that's why nutrition is third. And I definitely have a lot of personal philosophies for a lot of different reasons about nutrition. But bottom line is, make sure that you're eating enough, and that supplements are called supplements for a reason. You must spend most of your time eating a balanced diet every day of the week, all the time, because you spend all of your time being a human and part of the time being an athlete. So if you don't have that baseline fuel down, then the supplements and the protein and all the caffeine and whatever it is that you're doing isn't going to help you. And you're also not learning how to be a healthy human after your career, right? And so you need to be able to take away the positive, healthy benefits that you're learning through your sport to life. And supplements are not what you need to be doing for the rest of your life, right? Sleeping, if you aren't doing that, what are you doing, right? So then from there, so sleep, drink, eat. Move is exercise. It's going to keep you healthy. But more specifically within rowing, I always found that the athletes who moved better, had better mobility, and got injured less, and rowed better, right? So mobility certainly has an impact on your ability to row well and not get hurt. And so, for instance, we always had prehab and posthab that was prescribed, whether you had an injury problem or not. So we had, as a part of our warm-up, dynamic exercises and core strengthening and activation. It's not just about the strengthening, but it's the activation in your warm-ups that is important, where you're saying, hey, I want to go fast and I want to be stable. I need all of these supplemental muscles that stabilize my joints to wake up and come join me for practice. Like, that's a big piece of why you warm up. Cooling down, same thing. Let's reset back to normal, what's called normal resting posture, right? So think about the skeleton hanging in biology lab. He's just like, boop, right? Everything's balanced, everything's good. Rowing, all of our sports pull us out of balance. So we want to work to regain balance. And this doesn't have to take tons of time. I've run junior programs where you have 2 hours in the door, out the door. And even if you have 5 minutes before and after practice to warm up a bit and cool down a bit, all of your strokes are going to be better and you're going to stay healthier in the long run. That last piece is going to be the think, which is everything from telling jokes with your friends, right? Journaling, writing down what you did at practice, but also writing your feelings and things that you learned surrounding that. There were times I didn't, I guess I do have a stack of, they're back here somewhere. My training logs are in here. I have a stack of training logs. And even in there, I would get so detailed as to like, I had one of those days today. I even stepped in a puddle on the way to the car. Like that's in my training log next to what my heart rate was on a 3x6K workout, like so that's the value of the think piece, because when you write things down, when you have hobbies and ways to decompress from something that's really hard, it helps you bounce back. Writing things down is literally a record of all of the things that you've learned along the way. Because believe me, there are times when you feel like your life is over, even on the national team. You're like, I know nothing about this sport. I'm terrible at it. How could I possibly? And then you look at your training log and you go, oh, look where I was 10 days ago. Look what the last 10 days have been. The last 10 days have been fantastic. And I had a bad day today. So it helps you keep things in perspective rather than having what's called a negativity bias. It's natural human tendency. Rather than glomming on to one bad day, it helps you go, okay, there are things that are going well. And that's where kind of recording things allows you to reflect a little bit better on your actual progress. Because again, progress not linear. Or not linear, I should say. But overall, it's linear. It's going to go like this. So even as you improve, you're going to have those days. So it's important to, by tracking things, it helps you think a little bit better in the long run by not getting so bogged down by that one bad day.
And I think like those are I love that you put it like that, like, because those are things that especially younger athletes,
Yeah.
they don't think about, right? Like, and like they may know that sleep's important, but they haven't prioritized, a consistent routine with when to go to bed and when to wake up, right? They may think that hydration is good because someone says, right, but they haven't really put the second layer of thought into that, or the nutrition or the movement, which is one I really want to dive into. And then obviously the mental piece, right? Being able to kind of, reflect and understand where you've been so that you can kind of carve the path moving forward. And I think the simplicity of that is something that everyone should just write down. And it's like almost writing if you are logging, it's like making it a checklist, right? It's like, okay, did I do all the things listed here, right? And like, what was my score, right? How did I do, right? Like, did I actually think about when I went to bed and this and that? So I love that you had an easy way for people to think about it. Yeah, I think that's incredibly valuable.
I mean, I think that there's another piece here, right? Is that that is the sleep, drink, eat, move, and think. And sometimes you have a lot of work to do and you aren't going to be able to sleep as well, or you've got a lot on your mind and it keeps you up at night. And rather than getting caught up in like, oh my gosh, I'm not sleeping that well, while you're awake, can you manage the other things? Just make sure that the other legs of the table are really strong so that when you know that you're about to enter into, like, everybody knows that exam time is coming. Everybody knows that you've got a really hard period of work coming up, or there's something that in the future is going to be this period of time that is going to be really challenging. So you might not be able to sleep, for instance, that well. Just enter into it physically fit and hydrated and eating well. And that way you're as robust as you can possibly be to manage that challenge. And that's exactly the aim, is like, how can I be as physically robust as a human as possible so that I can manage the things when they come flying at me expectedly or unexpectedly. And that's what athletics encourages you to do, because you are literally exercising your physical system in physical challenges. And the more physically robust you are, the more mentally robust you will be. Especially, again, that to go back to that think piece, that's why it's more than just journaling. It's spend time with friends and tell jokes, because having that social support is going to help you a lot as well. Having that connection when challenges arise, when you have a robust machine and a group of people around you that are the same, you'll be able to manage those challenges so much better.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. And I think, like, even with that, the thing that I think I really want to hear from you and your perspective, it's like, I work a lot with high school athletes, and a lot of what I do is more when they're away from the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's like, winter or summer stuff, right? When they're not kind of in the fall and spring with their team.
Yeah.
And I think circling around to the value of, even if we bring it full circle with
Mm-hmm.
your walk-on experience and the athletic diversity that you had growing up and all learning how to move and all these
Mm-hmm.
different things, like
Mm-hmm.
one of the common things, I'd be curious your thoughts on this, is like there are a lot of people who, yeah, rowing is kind of the path,
Mm-hmm.
that they've chosen to
Mm-hmm.
follow all through high school, right? They do it 2, 3, 4 seasons a year, right? It's kind of like it's what they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of where they landed, right? Maybe they didn't have success in one sport, or they wanted to go all in on rowing, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I see a lot with that is they're only rowing. That's
Mm-hmm.
their primary modality.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the boat. They're on the erg. They're told that they have to do more, more, more. Which again,
Mm-hmm.
there's I think you know foundationally that's a good thing, but also it could be also a negative thing, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're not doing it the
Mm-hmm.
right way.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, they can't do a squat. They can't hold a plank. They
Yeah.
struggle to do proper hinges and proper movements. They don't understand a mobility routine.
Yep.
And then next thing you know, they get hurt and they're out for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
I'd be curious, like your thoughts, like what are like, do you see that as well? Do you see that as something that athletes, like, are there things that you found success in when in your work that you do? I know you're
Mm-hmm.
very knowledgeable on this
Mm-hmm.
topic, so
Mm-hmm.
kind of take it whichever direction you want.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we, I'm trying to think of a fancy way to say this, but like, how do we make athletes more resilient?
Yeah.
Like rowers
Yeah.
specifically, more
Yeah.
resilient to be able to
Physically
withstand
robust. Yeah. Yeah.
physically,
Yeah.
to be able to withstand the work that
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
required to kind of do it at a high level. Like,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, this is what I've spent ever since, because I started coaching before I went to grad school. And it was, okay, what can you do in this period of time that you have? And when you start to get a little bit more pinpoint, you don't have to do a million things, but if you really home in on the things that are going to be the most important, like ankle mobility, hip mobility, thoracic, there are a million ways to attack those things, right? And as long as you have kind of a baseline of what can I do? How can I build these things into my warmups? How can I build these things into how I'm asking athletes to row? Because we're often asking athletes to row in ways that are actually negatively impacting their system and taking them out of stable positions. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to be in, it's physics, a strong, stable position. And what that means is not, within the confines of rowing. If you move well overall and understand characteristics of stability outside of the boat, it's going to build stability in the boat. So with movement and functional movement being so mainstream now, there are a million things to do, but really, sure, you could do them all, but you don't need to do them all the time, all at once. Pick, okay, for one phase, try these and see how they help your ankle mobility. If it helps, awesome. If it doesn't, stop doing it. Do something different. Same thing with the hips, but it doesn't take a ton. It takes little by little consistency over time. And so if you choose a dynamic warm up that, and this is a little bit higher level, and I have a couple of resources for coaches and for coaches specifically to look at that I'll show you toward the end, but if you look at how can I build these needs into my warm-ups so that someone is ready for practice and also addressing mobility, that's going to save you time in the long run. If I, as a coach and as a person, understand what stability is and how it differs, and this is something that's interesting, is that like I actually wrote an indoor rowing course for US Rowing, and it's in the process of getting kind of put into a couple of different things. And so I dig really deeply into all of this in that. So keep an eye out for that when it becomes available, because I do have a lot of like, what does stability look like within rowing, and how does it differ just a little from weightlifting? Because there are some small differences, but then the same rule applies in your weightlifting. Can you address ankle, hip, and thoracic mobility while stabilizing the joints as well? How do I create stability throughout the whole system and build that from the ground up methodically and progressively? Not just, sure, lifting heavy is important, but if I take away and make you stand on one foot and then lift half that amount of weight, that's technically more than double that amount of weight on both legs, right? Like you could literally do, or maybe 60 or 70% of the weight on one leg and actually get stronger and more stable in the long run because you're standing on one leg, doing a Bulgarian squat, for instance, right? For those of you that know what that is. But then on the other end of it, same thing in your cool downs. Have targeted cool downs that, again, you don't have to take 20 minutes to do something. If you have it, great, awesome. If you don't and you have 5, at least target ankle, hip, and thoracic mobility and resetting the system back to normal resting posture, right? Our physical therapist at one point, who was working with us with the national team, he even said, if you don't even know what to do, just lie down flat on your back on the ground for 2 minutes, because gravity is going to just pull you back down. So there's value to something as simple as that as well. To dive a little deeper, if you want me to, without being like, do this exercise for this thing. If you're looking at the basics of, from a stretching standpoint, for instance, not just a mobilization and using some of the other more advanced layers of things, make sure that you're addressing your calves, hamstrings, glutes, hip flexors, inner thigh or adductors, and then all the muscles in your chest, as well as like reaching up overhead and getting into your lats. If you can start from the ground up and work your way up your body and send yourself off from practice after that, spend 30 seconds on each side in each of those body areas, and you're going to get gains over time if you visit it each day. I haven't done the math on that. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. So maybe 15 minutes to do all of it really thoroughly. So you could touch a portion of those in 5 minutes and be fine, because you can often get into positions that stretch multiple areas at once rather than just one. And that saves you time even more.
And I think like that, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, because I think there's so much good stuff here. And I think, like, because I remember a lot of time, like when we were up, in Hanover for for the camp up at Dartmouth, right? You would teach kind of that seminar with the athletes and getting them to kind of think again about the different mobility and movements that they can do to help preserve the body to be able to withstand the work that they do. And I think oftentimes a lot of athletes will think they'll see everything. They'll get all the shiny things that are on social media or that they read or that their friends tell them. And it's almost paralysis by analysis, right? They don't know how to, and now all of a sudden what could be a very easy 10 to 15 minute stretch like you just outlined, it becomes nothing, right? They're like, okay, well, I don't have a foam roller and a Theragun and this and that, and now I'm gonna, whatever, I don't need to do that, I'll do it tomorrow, right? And then tomorrow becomes 3 months straight. Like, I want to unpack it a little bit, but you kind of outline the principles, or the things that you can kind of target and make your focus both pre and even post or whatever it may be. Like, dive a little bit deeper into that importance. Dive a little bit deeper into, okay, why is this important? What could stem off of this? Or why am I spending 10 to 15 minutes daily doing this pre or doing this post? Dive into that a little bit. Help athletes understand the why behind why that's necessary.
A lot of times we have this built into practice. We have the hours for it. And I was even talking to a coach just the other day of a collegiate program who, I'm watching you do your warm up and you're taking this time, but you're not actually doing it, right? So it's built in, it's there. Coaches are providing it, but the athletes aren't necessarily going all in on it. And it's when they realize the benefit of it, or that you realize the benefit of it, right? As an athlete, depending on where you're coming from, whether you're a coach, parent, athlete, or just random person that is listening to us right now. It's important to when you start to feel that difference, then you go, I feel better. I move better. I'm rowing better. The importance of this, I started to notice as a coach when I was in grad school specifically, while also coaching. And there was an athlete who had rowed throughout high school whose blade was always in the air at the catch, right? And no coach could figure out why. The kid was pretty strong on the machine, but the blade was always in the air. And as a coach, you're given all the cues. As an athlete, you're receiving all the cues. You understand it. You're trying to execute this movement, but it's just not happening for you. So as I'm learning more about it and I'm watching this person move, I'm also doing all the strength conditioning, watching her move in the gym. And I'm going, oh, that's why. Because her hip mobility was so limited that she couldn't even squat properly. So the same patterns were happening in the gym that were happening in the boat. So then if we could just go into the weight room and help her squat better and actually do it really, really well, because I have also worked with strength conditioning coaches who overlook the importance of function and just want to load up. And I'm like, but now they're squatting shallowly and poorly, and you can see all these deviations, and the hips are going over here, and this is happening. And our job as strength professionals is to fix that. And that's the fun of what we get to do. You get to be curious about it. You don't have to hold someone back from getting stronger. You can just change the exercise they're doing and how they're doing it and get them stronger and more mobile and more stable at the same time. And there are lots of resources out there for that right now. And again, I'll show you one. I guess I could, since we're chatting about it right now, one in particular that I really like was this one, which was one of the books that I used when I was in grad school. And the reason why I like this is by the NCSF. The reason why I like it is because it's super practical. It's how do I use this in a coaching? And it teaches you the little nuances of why you do this or that when you're using this Olympic movement. And here are 4 ways to use corrective exercises that build you up to that movement. This is what's going to be the precursor to that later move. And so it actually has a lot of pictures that originally came with videos and things like that. And so it's a great coaching resource because it's practical. It's applied. It's, I want someone to squat. Let me look at that and understand for me why and how. And if this and there's also, if this is happening, it's probably this, try this. And so there's a lot of examples of that. And of course, it's a book. It's limited in terms of its examples, but it at least provides examples of what a root cause could be. And so it's a really helpful tool for that. So to go all the way back to this person whose blade was in the air, we started working on her hamstrings. It was just so simple as tight hamstrings that were preventing her blade from going in the water. As soon as we helped her in the weight room get better at her squatting with her mobility, more than anything else was stretching her, helping her be on point with her hamstring stretching, her blade started to go to the water much more easily. And it cured a lot of frustration on her part and a lot of, frustration, confusion on the coach's part as far as that's concerned. So that's an elaborate example of if your calves are tight. And I love working on the machine and showing people this. If your calves are tight or you have limited ankle mobility, what's going to happen as you start to compress, right? And I'll usually have someone sit down and demonstrate, well, your heels pop up, right? And sometimes your heels will pop up and your hips will tuck under simply because your calves are tight. What happens if your hamstrings are tight when you're rowing? Well, when you try to compress and come up to the catch, your butt's going to start to tuck under because you don't have enough length to be in this very agile position that you need to be in. You've bent forward, you've compressed your legs. So unless you can do a heels down squat to the ground, basically ATG, legs touching, you're probably not free enough to roll to the catch without inhibition. And, another piece that is simple is the other big piece that I look at is like chest. We all know the guys that only bench press in the gym, and this starts to happen. They pull forward. Well, if I'm stuck in this position forward, and this is my posture all the time, when I row, I'm only going to be hunched in my upper back. And what's inside my rib cage, all my organs, right? My heart, my lungs. If I'm here and I'm hunched, I'm probably compressing my lungs a bit too. So making sure that you're opening up the chest, stretching in the pecs, something as simple as that, stretching in the lats after practice, that can help you breathe better, right? And we're in a breathing sport. So those are 3 specific examples of how, if you do a better warm-up, 10 minutes, cool down better, focus when you're in the weight room, and maybe choose a couple of different lifts, you can free up all these things that are going to slow you down in the boat just because you're tight. Something, from a coaching standpoint, on the recovery, we want to be, I sometimes also, I started saying, you want to disappear on the recovery. You want to be non-existent. And if you're super tight, you cannot be non-existent on the recovery. Your body is literally going to resist the motion because you're tight. You're going to have to pull forward. And that's just going to slow the boat down too. So managing your mobility, even if all that you have designated in your practice time is 10 minutes here and there, and paying attention to how you're lifting better and better. If you get stuck and you can't figure out why, ask a coach or go, well, I'm having trouble squatting deeper. What maybe is the problem? There are a lot of internet resources, some good, some bad, or maybe they should just call you. Call one of us, right? Right? How do I fix this? That's where you call Kevin.
Yeah, and I think like again, like I could, oh man, this could be a whole nother 2 hours if we really wanted to, because again, I think there's so much value in there. And I think one of the things that
I can show you another book that goes along with it too. So another one to think about is The Business of Movement. Gray Cook is he's the functional movement systems guy, but that's a little bit more a little bit higher level if someone wants to really dive into it of the why. But there's some really good resources in there too about movement and why and how you can achieve these things.
And that's super helpful. And I'll get all those names and titles and put them in the show notes too for coaches to be able to grab too. Because again, I get this question a lot, and it's fun talking to someone like yourself. And I want to kind of also, again, continue to bridge into that as I be conscious of your time. But I
Mm-hmm.
think when you think about just injury prevention,
Mm-hmm.
injury mitigation, whatever
Mm-hmm.
way we want to describe it,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we make athletes more resilient? Because
Yeah.
again, especially in the winter time, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
very important because we're doing right. Our bodies are tight. We're cold.
Yeah.
It's dark. We're not even coming in with the best positive spirits. And now we're being asked to be on the erg for
Yeah.
however many minutes, heavy load, and all of a sudden, athletes, are hurt
Yeah.
and this and that.
Yep.
And I think talk to me a little bit about the relationship between, if we look at injury mitigation, injury prevention at the top,
Mm-hmm.
what is the relationship between, and or how do both mobility but then
Mm-hmm.
also strength
Mm-hmm.
training
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
better guide us towards being a little bit more resilient? Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
the mobility piece, right? And I think one piece I think would be helpful for coaches and athletes to hear is like, okay, well, is pre or post better, right? If I only
Yeah.
have 15 minutes, am I choosing a pre,
Yeah.
routine before I get on the water on the erg, or am I choosing a post routine? And then I think the second layer to that is strength training, which
Yeah.
I think is a huge piece. I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
experience with how does that help. Again, we can all say like performance is one thing, right?
Yeah.
You're a stronger athlete. Yeah, you can probably produce a little bit more power, this and that. But the injury prevention
Mm-hmm.
aspect, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is a massive component to that.
Yeah, when it's
Dive
done, I
into that if
mean,
you don't mind.
when done properly, strength training is something that absolutely can keep you injury free. A lot of coaches see injuries happen in the weight room, and having been in Division I weight rooms, I would say that you know it is a very useful tool, and when it's done improperly, it can cause a lot of problems. And that's where having some sort of overlap where coaches need to communicate and not just like, oh, I want this. Say, you can communicate with your strength staff and say, hey, like, let me teach you about the sport. Like, teach them how to row. Teach people how to row. Teach them to understand that it's not just bang and crash and heavy, that it's very delicate and that it's agile. And there's so much agility involved that rowers they need to be strong enough and not maximally strong, right? Like, I can tell you that I was only so strong. I had all of my teammates could basically out bench press me, out squat me, out do all the things. But the one lift that I could outdo other people in was the deadlift. And it wasn't because my legs were super strong. It was because I was actually strong in the middle and that my middle could support the strength of my legs. And a lot of times, I've had coaches out, oh, like the legs can get strong if they're on the leg press. Leg press has value for people that maybe have an injury issue, but it can also cause an injury problem because you aren't doing what's called a closed chain exercise. The core is not required to support that load. It's just push, push, push. And now the seat itself is supporting you. So you aren't developing the total fitness and strength together, right? You're developing a ton of leg strength, but your middle cannot support it. And that's where having a little bit of knowledge of strength conditioning helps you understand, okay, I read this article that tells me this thing about why this is going to help me with this, but you have to look at the whole picture and what that might be sacrificing in the long run. So when I look at deadlifting, I'm not looking at it as like, some people think it's a back exercise. And I'm like, I look at it as a how overall strong am I? What can my core support? How much load can my core support? And so even though I had teammates that could out squat me by a lot, if they couldn't out deadlift me, that told me that there was some loss in the middle. And a lot of those people did have back and rib problems. So there is, in hindsight, a correlation to those types of things. So the strength conditioning room can improve mobility and stability when done properly. And that is just one of these beautiful things about it. I think I had another colleague who was at one point in her career looking at, is there a way to quantify just how strong rowers need to be? Like, what is that number? It's hard, right? You can't really find it, but we know that we need to get up to a certain point and then repeat that, right? That's basically what our sport asks us to do. Some small things to consider that a lot of people sometimes overlook, because I've even had strength conditioning coaches ask me this: why do they need to go side to side or diagonally if they're only going back and forth? And it's for the same reason why a baseball player doesn't just strengthen everything that pulls them forward. They're doing things to pull them back, to make sure the decelerators, if they don't do that, they're going to throw their shoulders out. So for rowers, we need to think about moving rotationally, moving diagonally, moving laterally, and challenging the supportive structures that allow the big muscles to do their job. I work with a master's athlete who is a physical therapist, who likes to lift weights, who has been involved in sport for a long time. And she's now older and has specifically said that her maxes finally started getting better when she was over 50, because she started paying attention to shoulder stability and actually addressing exercises that would help her joints be more stable overall. So maintaining the mobility to get into the position, and then having the strength to help the joints stay in those positions. That's kind of those two key pieces there, is that like, if I'm tight and pulled forward, let's talk about shoulders, for instance, then my joint is not intact anymore. I could strengthen all kinds of around it, but now I can't use my structure the way it needs to be used. So I need to open up, get the mobility back so that my shoulder can be where it needs to be as a structure, and then strengthen around that. So now I'm even stronger. And that will keep you healthy in our sport, is to use your structure and then strengthen around the structure rather than just getting strong in improper positions. That's going to limit your peaks.
And I love that. And I'll just one thing on that. It's like, I think the thing that often a lot of people find, and I think coaches and athletes, right? Athletes more so, but coaches even, they might kind of wind up in this situation too, where it's like, well, that's not fun, right? That's not the exciting, right? It's not exciting, doing stabilizing exercises and this and that, right? It's not fun for the athlete.
Oh, I can give you some really hard stabilizing exercises.
Right. Yeah. and that's the thing, right? Like they don't think like, or we don't think like that, right? We think, okay, like, just like it's not fun to go out and do, just rowing drills all the time. We like to kind of, like just go hard sometimes, right? Like, so I think that's one thing that I think hearing it from you, where it's like, and the resources that you provided, which we're going to get into here, just to be conscious of your time, but the results in rowing, and really in a lot of things, like the results oftentimes happen in the boring stuff and the stuff that we don't see as, the glamorous, how much weight can you produce, or, throw up, or how much, how fast can you go on the erg, or this or that. The results oftentimes happen in the stuff that is mundane coupled with consistency, right? Or, just, things that you do repetitively that maybe aren't glamorous. So I love that. I think that's super valuable. I want to be again, like I'm gonna literally be like, hey, like when are we getting on you? When are we getting you on here again? Because we could literally have, this could be a 2.5 hour podcast if need
multiple
be.
Conversations.
Yeah, for both your time and the time of the audience, because I don't know if anyone's listening to my voice for that long. Talk a little bit about the resources that you provided, right? We'll spend a couple minutes here and then we'll have a little bit of wrap up, but talk a little about the resources that you provided. Again, we'll put them in the notes. But if you don't mind, we can spend a couple minutes doing that and then wrap things up.
Yeah. So first of all, I can't help but people always ask, and the more that I read it, or the more that I see, this is the book that I wrote, right? So I got to put that one out there. And that's why when people ask about all these questions that you're asking about walking on and what it was like, and go into Amazon, look at the reviews, click the most recent review, right? That'll give you a nugget of what it is. But people literally are like, 2 best rowing books are Boys in the Boat and this, right? Better Great Than Ever. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I need to read this book, but it also dives into the psychology of it. Like there are journal entries from my time throughout my training and throughout even college. So there are examples of what the heck a day is like when you're trying to digest 20K for the first time in your life, and what those days feel like, and all the thoughts that go through your mind, and the doubts and the fears and the how do you deal with it, and the silliness. And there's just a lot there as far as what it is like experientially, psychologically, physically, emotionally. Everything is in there. People often ask, what was it like to go to the Olympics? Well, that'll tell you what it was like, at least to a certain extent. To look back,
and we will definitely be putting that. I'll put a link in there in the notes, because again, I think that we didn't even scratch the surface on the depth that we could have gone in the first half of today's conversation. So I'm sure there's
even the commentary that I've gotten into as a result, which has only made me a better coach. I've done the commentary for the last 2 Olympic Games. But to go back to those 5 key things, and to give you resources, obviously, because this is a finite amount of time that we have here, the sleep, drink, eat, move, and think pieces. When it comes to sleep, this is a very small book that my good friend Karin Davies recommended to me a while back. And it is, we're talking this much on the pages. It's a very easy read, called Sleep to Win. And it's basically a doctor and sleep expert speaking to a hockey player, right? So someone that was a high school and then college and then NHL hockey player. So written as like a series of emails back and forth. Great nuggets of information about why sleep is important and also sleep strategies. Very easy read. So that's your sleep piece. And then to go into the drink and eat, this is again, another very small book that literally looks like this on every page. And it's just, I think it's 60 some odd, just little nuggets, not to like, just to set that foundation of the simple things like, when you go to the grocery store, treat it like a library, read the ingredients, understand that if it doesn't ever go bad, it's probably, like just little things that are great little nuggets about food habits that are very small and adjustable things that will help you find that baseline to support yourself as a human being, right? And then you can add your layers of that other 20% of your life that you spend being an athlete on top of that. But do this stuff foundationally. It's going to start putting you on the right track. The move stuff, and then we talked about core strength, so it's always good. So Business of Movement, that's great. Cook is a great book about that in terms of movement and functional movement. I already showed you the advanced concepts of strength conditioning. It's Brian Biagioli, who is my advisor in grad school. Great. It has a Division I football background, and yet can move like very balletically, like a dancer. And it's just interesting where I can tell you right now that all of my friends who went to the Olympics in weightlifting and who are in the USA Weightlifting Hall of Fame, all that they talk about is mobility, right? These are some of the strongest people in the world, and you should see them move. It's amazing. So strength and mobility work together. They are synergistic. Here's a book that was recommended to me a long time ago. This is an old book, but Core Performance. Just keep it simple. It's a thin book, lots of pictures inside there, lots of helpful exercises. Yeah. Very, very simple, very, very useful. A lot of the things we did when I was in the national team are in here. A lot of professional athletes. So that's the sleep, drink, and eat, and then the move. And then to get into the think, two, again, not very challenging books to read, but as you can see, this one was very important. The Passion Paradox is some great insight into why we do the things that we do. A lot of it really resonated with me. And then Body, Mind, Mastery by Dan Millman is another really good one. Again, all of these books, this one also has strategies and different activities and things like that you can do for your psyche. So those are some great mindset related books that are, again, very easy to read. And I guess this is also a mindset book. But again, very easy resources that have pictures and activities and are very practical. And I don't recommend something unless it really resonates of like, oh my gosh, this person gets it. And honestly, I've read a lot of books and very few times do I sit back and go, oh my gosh, I want more of this because this person gets it. And these are some of those resources.
There's literally like a master's course, like just in those books that you just provided. And I'm an active reader and there's a bunch in there that I got to read too. Like, cause this, like, there's some really good things. And that's probably, I'm sure your library is much deeper than that even with that. So it's like,
but these are the most used ones. And, to go back to the fun of strength and conditioning, notice that we don't just call it weightlifting, right? We're talking about strength and conditioning because this book, even teaches you how to do fun exercises like agility drills and things like that also make the strength conditioning fun, right? Moving diagonally isn't just moving a weight diagonally. It's, can I run diagonally? So even just playing games, you go back all the way to we go back to the German Democratic Republic, decades and decades ago. Even in that rowing regime, that system, they would say that playing games is important. And what do games do? Other than just making it fun, they have us reaching and crouching and laughing and playing and moving diagonally, and moving in weird, different ways. And as long as we develop some skill through strength and conditioning, and then we start to fold in some games, we'll have the ability to react and we'll have the ability to withstand cutting and turning without actually getting hurt, and then you can start to incorporate that stuff into your rowing practices and in your rowing training.
That's awesome. And Lindsay, this was amazing. I want to wrap things up with just my last question for you. Like any any bits of advice that you would be able to provide to high school athletes, college athletes, you name it, like any last little pieces of advice, any direction that you want to go with this. But any last bits of pieces of advice that you would provide to an athlete who is trying to take something from your path and better set themselves up for long-term success in rowing?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it seems like we talked about a lot of things and that there are a lot of resources in there, but with those 5 basic things, that sleep, drink, eat, move, think, pick one thing, learn about it, and really start to fold that into what you're doing. And try not to overcomplicate sport. Enjoy being a part of the team. The more that you enjoy it, the better you can be. Like oftentimes people will reflect and say like, oh, at that level, you have to love it a ton to keep doing it at that point, And so even at the Olympic level, you're still having fun, you're still being silly. And then the other thing is never to discount the importance of just really enjoying this process and really enjoying being a part of a team. The way that things, have changed, there's a lot of gadgets involved and things like that that can distract us from the very basic nature of being human and experiencing a sport. And so really enjoying the fact that rowing allows you to be outside, be with your teammates, be by the water, and challenge yourself in a lot of different ways is a really beautiful thing. So, really just kind of let that time be your time to step back from all of the demands and all the digital things and just enjoy the simple nature of exercising your body and trying to get a little better every time that you get out there.
No, this is amazing. Your passion, your dedication, and just to learning and being a student was absolutely a blast to learn from. Again, this could be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. Good luck as you kick off new adventures. And we will definitely be doing a round 2 at a later date when you kind of adjust to being down in Florida and this and that. Like we'll do another one at a later date because we could dive totally into so many different things. But again, thank you so much for coming on. This is an absolute blast.
Yeah, appreciate you, Kevin. Appreciate it a lot.